Hey there, this is Della Rucker. Thank you for joining me today. It is one of those days I'm actually having to wear my glasses because my eyes did not want to play with those plastic contact things today. So I don't know why. It's not, particularly polleny or rainy or anything down here, but it was not a good idea. I put those contacts in this morning and went, nah, we're not doing that today. So I usually don't like to wear my glasses when I do these videos because you get reflections and whatever, but let's try scooting this way. There we go. Everything's backwards. It's always fun. So thanks for joining me today. And my apologies for the little reflection thingies. I'm Della Rucker. I am the principal of the Wise Economy Workshop and author of this book, The Local Economy Revolution Has Arrived. There we go. What's changed and how you can help. Available wherever you get your books, including bookshop.org, Amazon, Lulu, Gumroad, Barnes & Noble, wherever. Going to be available for order because, this isn't the kind of thing that they stock on the bookshelves too often. But the focus of this book is on understanding how the world is changing and understanding particularly how those changes are impacting the ways that we can work to make the communities that we care about better. And I don't care whether you're a professional urban planner, economic developer, or whatever, or whether you're simply a person who wants to make a difference, wants to make an impact, and is trying to figure out how to have it. In any of those cases, I think this book and other work from Wise Economy Workshop ought to be helpful to you. We get told, and sometimes we assume, that there are particular ways to do things, that you have to start a nonprofit, or you have to do this, or you have to do that, or et cetera, et cetera. And one of the really interesting things about the moment that we're in right now is that a lot of those assumptions are increasingly not fitting. We can do things, we can work in ways, we can create in ways that we never could before. And so it's a really exciting time to be doing whatever it is that you're going to do to make a difference in your community. One of the things that I've been doing in these videos lately has been reading you a little bit of this book. And I am an ex-teacher, so reading out loud, I mostly taught middle school and high school. You don't get to read out loud too much with that group, but yeah, sometimes you do. So what I'm going to read today is a really interesting selection. I wrote this piece initially 8 or 10 years ago. It's been quite a while. And when I wrote it, it was really at the height of the new urbanist movement. Celebration Florida was a big thing. A lot of new urbanist development was going on. And the conversations around places that are walkable and places that are transit friendly and all of that kind of thing, that was kind of a new conversation at the time. And so Andreas Dwani, who is the architect who goes unnamed in this particular selection, was really a poster child for that work, and I think still is. When this came out, I am very devoted to the new urbanism. And ironically, about 6 years later, I ended up working on a team that won the biggest award put out by the Congress for the New Urbanism. So it ended up being a very, very strange circular thing, at least in my own mind. I don't know that, Dwani or anybody particularly close to him ever read or heard this thing, but I certainly got an earful from some folks on both sides of the spectrum. So as you'll see, if you're familiar with my work, you know that I advocate really hard for public engagement. and for people being not just showing up in a meeting and, getting talked at and then saying, well, I don't like this for whatever reason, but really being part of the process. And so the story that I'm going to tell in this selection is really about kind of a lesson learned in that context. So now you know who the, person who's not being named is. Shh. No, I don't care. Tell whoever you want to tell, especially if it sells a book. So with that out of the way, here we go. This section, again, from Local Economy Revolution has arrived, what's changed, and how you can help. This section is titled Design Arrogance and the Lesson of America. A few years ago, and in an interview with one of the current luminaries of the new urbanist movement was published, in which that august personage asserted that public participation requirements are too onerous to enable great design work to get done. The ignorant, NIMBY rabble kept getting in the way. Early in my career, I worked as a public historian and a historic preservation specialist. So rather than launch immediately into my opinion and my soapbox, let me tell you a true story. And I'll add that this is one that has had an incredibly profound impact on my thinking and my work, going back long before I became an urban planner or an economic developer. And it's really crucial. It's really kind of the story I'm going to tell you is kind of a crucial underpinning for the understanding that I've come to bring to my work, even though it predates me by a lot. In the 1950s, business owners in downtowns across the country became agitated over the fact that their central business districts were facing a double challenge: increasing amounts of traffic congestion and increasing competition from new suburban shopping centers. One of the cities that faced this was Green Bay, Wisconsin, which had a very energetic and very forward-thinking business leadership circle. I knew many of those leaders years later, when I had the responsibility for dealing with some of the unintended consequences and externalities of their decisions. The good men, and they were almost all men, of Green Bay did what most forward-thinking leaders do when they're faced with a fearful challenge on the horizon. They hired a consultant. The consultant they chose was Victor Gruen, an architect who had recently gained fame designing the nation's first enclosed shopping mall in Edina, Minnesota. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. In the couple of years that had lapsed since the Southgate Mall plans hit the street, Gruen had become a celebrity, the Andreas Dewani of his day. In a 2004 article for The New Yorker, Malcolm Gladwell described Gruen as short, stout, and unstoppable, with a wild head of hair and eyebrows like unpruned hedgerows. Gladwell summed up Gruen's impact on that era and today pretty succinctly. Quote, Victor Gruen didn't design a building, he designed an archetype. For a decade, He gave speeches about it, wrote books, and met with one developer after another and waved his hands in the air excitedly. And over the past half century, that archetype has been reproduced so faithfully on so many thousands of occasions that today virtually every suburban American goes shopping or wanders around or hangs out in a Southdale facsimile at least once or twice a month. Victor Gruen may well have been the most influential architect of the 20th century. He invented the mall. Gruen, end quote. That was all Gladwell. Now it's me. Gruen insisted in Green Bay, as he did in dozens of other cities in the 1950s and 1960s, that the key to solving downtown's problems was to completely separate vehicular traffic from pedestrians. By massively widening Main Street at the north end of Green Bay's commercial district and completely enclosing the core of the existing commercial district, all of downtown's problems would be solved. All it required was money and a willingness to be unsentimental and practical. You don't have to be Gladwell to understand what happened. It took 20 years for Gruen's vision to obtain some form of reality. And during that time, the city's business and political leadership and its planning staff stuck to Gruen's plan as diligently as the real-world constraints of financing and private development would enable. Of course, those real-world constraints enabled it a lot less than Gruen envisioned. By the time it opened in 1977, Port Plaza Mall and its associated parking lots and garages had obliterated obliterated acres of downtown buildings, dislocated 100 residents, and sent dozens of businesses to liquidation or to the far edge of the newly sprawling city, where many of them remained for decades. The collateral damage of grand ideas. If Gruen thought of those impacts at all, I wager he simply thought that was the price of progress. And all of that might be okay, at least from a strict economic point of view, if Gruen's plan had worked. It didn't. Port Plaza Mall lost money from virtually day one. By the early 1980s, Port Plaza was doing so poorly that the city took the advice of another consultant and bulldozed another full block of buildings to add a magic third anchor, which they were assured was the way to fix the problems. By the early 2000s, that anchor was gone. Green Bay, like many cities that drank the downtown mall Kool-Aid, continued for years to struggle with a downtown dominated by a windowless, dispiriting, too much vacant hulk where its heart should be. Meanwhile, the region's former Skid Row, right across the Fox River and within eyesight of that mall, became the hottest urban neighborhood in the region. And it was the winner of a Great American Main Street Award in 2009. This isn't a story about the virtues of historic preservation, Although the Green Bay story is certainly a good object lesson for the old Kenneth Galbraith question. And that question, as an aside, was, the preservation movement has one great curiosity. There's never retrospective controversy or regret. Preservationists are the only people in the world who are invariably confirmed in their wisdom after the fact. So that's what that references to. Gruen's idea didn't fail because Green Bay wanted old buildings or because the people who lived and worked in those old downtown buildings did something to undermine the plan. Like most people of that era, the majority of the city's leadership and residents placed their faith in the expert and in the idea of progress. Whatever gut misgivings they may have had were pushed aside. The plan was made by an expert, a national expert, right? Instead, Gruen's Mall failed because he envisioned and sold an ideal solution without giving attention to economic realities and without consideration of the myriad of unforeseen and unintended consequences that could and did develop. It's possible to say that Gruen could have tried to understand American development economics. But even if he did, we know that fully anticipating those unforeseen factors probably would have been impossible. Gruen stood at the beginning of the era, and there was no way anybody could anticipate how the world would change in a few short decades. But the greatest failure of Gruen's plan was that he did not recognize or acknowledge that his grand vision could very well turn out wrong. We should have learned by now that our grand visionary designers are not infallible. Our landscapes are littered with grand visionary architecture that was supposed to fix something or create something big. And so few of those grand visions ever came out the way they were promised, or managed not to create a new set of problems in the process. You never heard of Port Plaza in Green Bay, Wisconsin? That's because there's Port Plazas of one flavor or another in virtually every city across the country. Some are malls, some are stadiums, some are brutalistic, forsaken parks. You can pick them out easily by their grand design ambitions and their total lack of life. The fact that we have not learned this is a blot on architecture and on planning and on economic governance and on community leadership writ large. Understanding the real reasons why people oppose a project requires the willingness to do so, the humility to listen, and the internal fortitude and self-assurance to admit that possibly, oh, just possibly, we don't know everything that there is to know. That is the real mark of wisdom. Marquee designer types like Gruen have the privilege of maintaining a distance from the dirty work of making a project functional in real life. I've worked with many of the nameless landscape architects and urban designers and architects who are hired by the developers after the grand visionary types are paid and have gathered their glory and their big checks and left. And it is those highly competent, highly talented professionals who deal with the fact that the grand architect ignored the steep slope under the project, or the fact that that charming landscape driveway empties out onto a major intersection and those planting beds will block drivers' ability to see cars pulling out. How much of that rework could the marquee designers have learned and anticipated and fixed by simply listening with honesty and humility to the people who are experts on that specific location? How much would Gruen have learned about how the community's businesses would or would not fit into his grand design? Little stuff. Who cares? If the people who live around a proposed development oppose that development, chances are they might know something that is important to the health of their neighborhood and to the larger community as well. If we think that we are too much hot stuff to have to listen to them, then we are no better than little Napoleons in big capes, creating monuments to our hubris that our children and our grandchildren will have to clean up. And in fact, it will be worse than that, because the object lesson of the damage that we can do in our ignorance already exists all around us. Gladwell describes the end of Gruen's life in terms that remind me of a Greek myth. The lesson of America was that the grand, this is Malcolm Gladwell. Quote, the lesson of America was that the grandest of visions could be derailed by the most banal of details, such as the size of the retail footprint or whether Congress set the depreciation allowance at 40 years or 20 years. When, late in life, Gruen came to realize this, it was a powerfully disillusioning experience. He revisited one of his old shopping centers and pronounced himself in, quote, severe emotional shock, unquote. Developers were interested only in profit. Quote, I refused to pay alimony for those bastard developments, unquote. He said in a speech in London in 1978. He turned away from his adopted country. He had fixed up a country house outside of Vienna, and soon he moved back for good. But what did he find there when he got there? Just south of Old Vienna, a mall had been built. In his anguished words, a, quote, gigantic shopping machine, unquote. It was putting the beloved shopkeepers, the independent shopkeepers of Vienna, out of business. It was crushing the life of his city. Gruen was devastated. Victor Gruen invented the shopping mall in order to make America more like Vienna. He ended up making Vienna more like America. So again, that's a section called Design, Arrogance, and the Lesson of America. In this book, Global Economy Revolution has arrived, what's changed and how you can help. So thank you for listening. That was a little bit of a longer section, and but it's interesting to revisit, especially at a moment in our history where we don't so much, malls aren't that much of a big deal anymore, and yet the lessons of listening and being aware of our own limitations as creators is probably as relevant or more relevant than ever. So I hope that's helpful. Again, if you're interested, there's more to be had here. You find the Local Economy Revolution has arrived as something you can order on digital or print, wherever you get your books. And I hope that you will join me again on Friday, where, as the old saying goes, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, we'll be reading another selection. So in the meantime, a couple more small bits. One is that if you haven't subscribed to the Wiseful Substack, you'll get more up-to-date information, analysis and insight like this, but on current events going on all over the world as this local economy revolution is percolating to the surface in all sorts of unexpected places. You can get that newsletter and more benefits at wiseeconomy.substack.com. Wiseful Press has other books that may be useful to you, especially if you're an urban planner or an economic developer. And I hope that you'll check out wiseeconomy.com, wisefulpressbooks.com, and localeconomyrevolutionbook.com for more information on all of these things. So thanks again for taking the time to be with me today. And I'll see you later. Go get 'em.